Most people see INFJs as gentle empaths who avoid conflict at all costs. They're the ones who give endless second chances, absorb everyone's emotional problems, and seem incapable of hurting a fly. But there's a psychological switch hidden beneath that compassionate exterior. And when it flips, the transformation is both shocking and strategic. What triggers this shift from helper to strategic operator isn't random emotional outbursts or typical anger. It's a calculated response rooted in specific neurological patterns that most people completely misunderstand. Today, we're exploring the exact psychological mechanism that transforms the caring INFJ into someone who can systematically dismantle toxic people and situations with surgical precision. Before we start, please hit the like button, comment, and subscribe so you won't miss any of our weekly deep dives into the world of personality types. And if you're looking for a deeper understanding of yourself and your INFJ personality, browse our favorite INFJ products in the description, and click the link in the comments to take our favorite free personality test. The empathetic foundation that creates the contrast. The reason INFJ ruthlessness feels so jarring is because it emerges from a foundation of genuine empathy that runs deeper than most people can comprehend. INFJs don't just feel emotions. They absorb emotional data from everyone around them like a psychological sponge. Their dominant function, introverted intuition, processes patterns in human behavior subconsciously, creating detailed psychological profiles of every person they encounter. This isn't conscious people reading. It's an automatic data collection system that operates in the background of every interaction. An INFJ notices microexpressions, vocal patterns, behavioral inconsistencies, and emotional undercurrents that others miss entirely. They're building comprehensive maps of people's motivations, fears, strengths, and vulnerabilities without even trying. The empathetic trap begins because INFJs use this information primarily to help others. They see potential in people that those individuals can't see in themselves. When someone is struggling, the INFJ's first instinct is to use their insights to guide that person toward healing or growth. They give people far more chances than they deserve because they can see the wounded child beneath the toxic behavior. This creates a psychological burden that most personality types never experience. INFJs carry the emotional weight of everyone around them, while simultaneously trying to fix problems that aren't theirs to solve. They become unpaid therapists, emotional dumping grounds, and constant sources of support for people who rarely reciprocate. The psychological cost of this constant emotional labor is enormous. INFJs often find themselves depleted, anxious, and overwhelmed because they're processing not just their own emotional reality, but the emotional chaos of everyone in their orbit. They struggle with boundaries because their empathy makes other people's pain feel like their own responsibility. What makes this particularly dangerous for the INFJ is that toxic individuals instinctively recognize their empathetic nature and exploit it. Narcissists, manipulators, and emotional vampires are drawn to INFJs like moths to flame because they sense someone who will absorb their dysfunction without fighting back. The INFJ's desire to see the good in people becomes a vulnerability that predators learn to weaponize. The internal conflict intensifies as the INFJ begins recognizing patterns of manipulation, but fights against their own intuition. They want to believe that their kindness will eventually transform the toxic person, so they ignore red flags and rationalize away abuse. They tell themselves that if they just give a little more understanding, show a little more patience, the other person will finally change. This is where the psychological foundation for ruthlessness begins forming. Every boundary violation, every instance of taken advantage of, every moment of recognized manipulation gets filed away in the INFJ's subconscious database. They're not just collecting emotional data anymore. They're building evidence files on people who have proven themselves untrustworthy. The empathy that once drove them to help becomes the very mechanism that will eventually destroy those who abuse it. All that psychological insight they gathered to heal and support others becomes tactical intelligence waiting to be deployed. The INFJ knows exactly where each person's psychological weak points are located because they've spent months or years trying to heal those same wounds. This creates a unique form of cognitive dissonance that other personality types rarely experience. The INFJ simultaneously wants to help and recognizes the futility of helping someone who doesn't want to change. They can see both the person's potential and their deliberate choice to remain toxic. This internal tension builds pressure until something has to give, and when it does, the transformation from empath to strategic operator happens with startling speed and precision. The trigger point, when pattern recognition becomes weaponized. The transformation from empathetic helper to strategic operator doesn't happen gradually. There's a specific moment when the INFJ's psychological framework shifts, and it's almost always triggered by the recognition that their empathy is being systematically exploited. This isn't about someone having a bad day or making mistakes. It's about the INFJ realizing they're dealing with someone who deliberately uses their compassion as a weapon against them. The trigger often comes when the INFJ catches someone in a calculated lie or manipulation that reveals the depth of their exploitation. Maybe it's discovering that a friend has been sharing their private conversations to gain social advantage. Perhaps it's realizing a romantic partner has been using their emotional support while simultaneously pursuing other relationships. Or it could be recognizing that a family member has been playing victim to extract resources while showing no genuine intention of changing. What makes this moment so psychologically significant is that the INFJ's dominant function, introverted intuition, suddenly reframes all the collected data from a helping perspective to a threat assessment perspective. All those months or years of gathered psychological intelligence shift from being tools for healing to weapons for protection. The same pattern recognition system that once sought to understand and nurture now seeks to neutralize and defend. This cognitive switching happens because the INFJ's inferior function, extroverted sensing, finally kicks in under perceived threat. Normally, INFJs live primarily in their intuitive inner world, but when their survival instincts activate, they become capable of swift, decisive action in the external world. The combination of detailed psychological insight and sudden external focus creates a formidable strategic mind. In workplace situations, this might manifest when an INFJ realizes a colleague has been taking credit for their ideas while simultaneously undermining their reputation. The INFJ doesn't just get angry. They begin systematically documenting evidence, building alliances, and strategically exposing the manipulation. They use their understanding of office politics and human psychology to dismantle their opponent's credibility with surgical precision. In relationships, the trigger often comes when the INFJ recognizes a pattern of emotional manipulation that they can no longer rationalize away. They might discover that their partner's depression conveniently flares up whenever the INFJ tries to set boundaries, or that their friends' emergencies always seem to occur when the INFJ has something important happening in their own life. Once the pattern becomes undeniable, the empathy shuts off like a switch. Family dynamics provide some of the most complex trigger scenarios because INFJs often feel obligated to maintain relationships regardless of toxicity. The breaking point usually comes when they realize that their family member is not just dysfunctional, but actively harmful to others in the family system. An INFJ might tolerate personal abuse for years, but the moment they recognize that a toxic family member is damaging their children or other vulnerable relatives, the protective instinct overrides everything else. The psychological mechanism behind this shift involves what researchers call cognitive switching under threat. The INFJ's brain literally reorganizes its priorities from connection seeking to threat elimination. The same neural pathways that once processed emotional data for empathetic purposes now process it for strategic advantage. This isn't anger or emotional reactivity. It's calculated protective intelligence. What makes INFJ ruthlessness particularly effective is that it emerges from a place of moral clarity rather than personal vendetta. They're not seeking revenge for hurt feelings. They're implementing justice for violated principles. This moral framework actually enhances their strategic capability because they feel completely justified in using every psychological tool at their disposal to neutralize what they perceive as a legitimate threat to themselves or others they care about. The transformation is so complete that toxic individuals often report feeling like they're dealing with a completely different person. The warm, understanding INFJ they thought they knew disappears, replaced by someone who seems to know their deepest secrets and isn't afraid to use that knowledge strategically. The ruthless transformation, from helper to strategic operator. Once the psychological switch flips, the INFJ undergoes a transformation that's both methodical and devastating. All that emotional data they've been collecting for months or years suddenly becomes tactical information in a strategic war they never wanted to fight, but are uniquely equipped to win. The same person who once used their insights to heal and support now deploys those exact same insights to systematically dismantle toxic individuals and situations. The famous INFJ door slam is actually the mildest form of this transformation. Most people think the door slam is about cutting someone off emotionally, but it's really about cutting off their access to the INFJ's psychological resources. The toxic person loses their emotional dumping ground, their source of validation, their unpaid therapist, and their strategic advantage all at once. What looks like simple avoidance is actually sophisticated resource withdrawal. But when the door slam isn't enough, when the toxic person continues to create problems or harm others, the INFJ escalates to more advanced strategies. They begin using emotional withdrawal as a tactical weapon, becoming completely unreadable to people who once relied on their emotional availability. The manipulator who used to count on the INFJ's predictable empathy suddenly finds themselves dealing with someone who gives nothing away emotionally. Information warfare becomes another powerful tool in the INFJ's arsenal. Remember, they've been absorbing secrets, vulnerabilities, and psychological weak points for years. When protection mode activates, they're not above strategically sharing information that exposes the toxic person's true nature to others. They don't spread malicious gossip. They reveal patterns of behavior that others need to know for their own protection. The systematic exposure of toxic behavior is where INFJ ruthlessness becomes truly formidable. They don't just tell people that someone is manipulative. They create situations where the toxic person exposes themselves. They ask carefully crafted questions in group settings that force the manipulator to reveal their contradictions. They document patterns and present evidence that's impossible to deny or rationalize away. What makes INFJs incredibly effective at dismantling toxic systems is their ability to see the bigger picture while simultaneously understanding individual psychological dynamics. They recognize how toxic individuals operate within larger social or professional systems, and they know exactly which pressure points to apply to cause the entire dysfunctional structure to collapse. They're not just fighting one person, they're strategically restructuring entire environments. The psychological protection mechanism that enables this ruthlessness involves a complete emotional detachment that other personality types struggle to achieve. The INFJ's emotions don't disappear, they get compartmentalized and redirected toward protection rather than connection. This allows them to make strategic decisions without being clouded by guilt, sympathy, or false hope about the toxic person's potential for change. Perhaps most unsettling for their targets, INFJs begin exploiting the very weaknesses they previously tried to heal. The insecure bully, who once received compassionate understanding for their childhood trauma, now finds that same trauma being used to predict and counter their aggressive behaviors. The narcissistic colleague, who once benefited from the INFJ's patience with their ego needs, suddenly discovers that same ego being strategically deflated in public settings. The transformation is so complete that toxic individuals often report feeling like they're in a psychological chess game they can't win. The INFJ anticipates their moves, counters their strategies, and seems to know their psychological playbook better than they know it themselves. This isn't because INFJs are naturally manipulative. It's because they spent so much time trying to understand and help these individuals that they know exactly how their minds work. What separates INFJ ruthlessness from other forms of strategic behavior is that it operates within a clear moral framework. They're not seeking personal advantage or revenge. They're implementing what they see as necessary justice. This moral clarity actually makes them more effective because they feel completely justified in using every psychological tool at their disposal to neutralize what they perceive as a legitimate threat to themselves or innocent others. The uncomfortable truth about INFJ ruthlessness. There's an uncomfortable truth that most people don't want to acknowledge. Toxic individuals instinctively fear INFJs even before any conflict begins. It's not because INFJs are naturally aggressive or threatening. It's because manipulative people can sense, on some subconscious level, that they're dealing with someone who sees through their psychological games. The same intuitive ability that makes INFJs excellent at understanding people also makes them natural lie detectors and manipulation sensors. This creates a unique dynamic where toxic individuals often try to neutralize or discredit INFJs preemptively. They spread rumors about the INFJ being too sensitive or dramatic. They try to isolate them from social groups or professional networks. They attempt to gaslight them into doubting their own perceptions. These aren't random attacks. They're strategic attempts to disable someone they instinctively recognize as a threat to their manipulative operations. What makes INFJ ruthlessness different from other personality types is that it emerges from a place of moral conviction rather than personal ego. When an ENFJ becomes ruthless, it's often driven by their desire to maintain harmony and their image as a helper. When an INTJ becomes ruthless, it's typically about intellectual superiority or strategic advantage. But when an INFJ becomes ruthless, it's about implementing justice and protecting innocent people from harm. This moral framework actually makes INFJ ruthlessness more effective because they don't get distracted by personal feelings or ego concerns. They're not trying to prove they're smarter or more powerful than their opponent. They're simply eliminating what they perceive as a source of unnecessary suffering in the world. This clarity of purpose allows them to make strategic decisions that other types might hesitate to implement due to social concerns or guilt. The long-term psychological benefits of embracing this protective mechanism are significant, though most INFJs resist acknowledging them. When an INFJ finally stops trying to fix toxic people and starts protecting themselves and others from them, their mental health dramatically improves. The constant anxiety of trying to manage other people's dysfunction disappears. The depression that comes from absorbing endless negativity lifts. The chronic stress of maintaining impossible relationships finally resolves. Society misunderstands this transformation as dangerous because it challenges the narrative that empathetic people should be endlessly forgiving and self-sacrificing. There's a cultural expectation that kind people will tolerate abuse indefinitely. And when INFJs refuse to play that role anymore, it's perceived as a betrayal of their nature. But this perspective completely misses the evolutionary purpose of having both empathy and strategic capability in the same psychological system. The ability to shift from helper to protector represents a sophisticated survival mechanism that served our ancestors well. In tribal societies, the individuals who could both nurture the group and defend it from threats were invaluable for collective survival. The same person who could heal emotional wounds could also identify and neutralize psychological predators who threaten the tribe's well-being. Modern society has somehow convinced empathetic people that their protective instincts are character flaws rather than essential survival tools. We're told that good people don't use their knowledge of psychology strategically, that nice people don't exploit others' weaknesses, even in self-defense. This conditioning leaves empathetic individuals vulnerable to exploitation, while protecting the very predators who abuse them. The uncomfortable truth is that INFJ ruthlessness serves a crucial social function. When toxic individuals face no consequences for their behavior, they escalate their manipulation and harm more people. When INFJs implement strategic consequences, they're not just protecting themselves, they're protecting everyone else in that person's orbit. The colleague who gets exposed for taking credit stops stealing from others. The manipulative family member who gets cut off stops poisoning family dynamics. The abusive partner who gets strategically dismantled stops harming their next victim. Why this shift is actually psychological health. The mental health cost of suppressing natural protective instincts is something most INFJs don't realize until they finally stop doing it. For years, they've been conditioned to believe that their empathy should be unlimited, that setting boundaries is selfish, and that walking away from toxic people makes them bad people. This conditioning creates a psychological prison where INFJs become trapped in cycles of abuse, depletion, and self-blame. When an INFJ finally embraces their strategic thinking and protective capabilities, the relief is immediate and profound. The constant anxiety that comes from trying to manage unmanageable people disappears. The depression that results from absorbing endless toxicity lifts. The chronic stress of maintaining relationships with individuals who drain their energy without reciprocating finally resolves. They discover that protecting themselves isn't cruelty, it's basic psychological hygiene. The difference between healthy boundaries and people-pleasing becomes crystal clear once INFJs stop apologizing for their protective instincts. People-pleasing is about managing other people's emotions to avoid conflict, even at the expense of your own well-being. Healthy boundaries are about recognizing that you're not responsible for other people's emotional regulation, and you have the right to protect yourself from those who refuse to regulate themselves. Research in psychology consistently shows that individuals who can both connect deeply and protect effectively have better mental health outcomes than those who can only do one or the other. The ability to shift between empathy and strategic thinking represents psychological flexibility, not dysfunction. It's the difference between being emotionally intelligent and being emotionally naive. INFJs who accept this duality are demonstrably more successful in their careers, relationships, and personal goals. They stop wasting energy on people who will never change and redirect that energy toward individuals who genuinely appreciate their insights and support. They build relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided emotional labor. They create work environments where their contributions are valued rather than exploited. The transformation also improves their ability to help others authentically. When INFJs stop trying to fix everyone, they become more effective at supporting people who actually want to grow. They can offer genuine assistance without the desperation that comes from feeling responsible for other people's choices. Their empathy becomes a gift they choose to give, rather than a resource that gets extracted from them. Perhaps most importantly, embracing their protective capabilities allows INFJs to model healthy behavior for others. When they refuse to tolerate manipulation, they show other empathetic individuals that it's possible to be kind without being a doormat. When they implement consequences for toxic behavior, they demonstrate that compassion doesn't require self-sacrifice. Their transformation gives permission for other people to protect themselves too. The importance of not apologizing for protecting yourself from toxicity cannot be overstated. Society will pressure INFJs to feel guilty for using their psychological insights strategically, but this guilt serves no constructive purpose. You don't apologize to a virus for taking medicine. You don't feel bad for removing poison from your environment. Toxic people are psychological hazards, and treating them as such isn't cruelty, it's wisdom. This transformation ultimately serves justice, rather than personal revenge. When INFJs implement strategic consequences for manipulative behavior, they're not seeking to harm anyone. They're seeking to restore balance to systems that have become corrupted by unchecked toxicity. They're protecting innocent people from predators who exploit empathy as weakness. They're creating environments where genuine connection can flourish by removing those who poison authentic relationships. The INFJ's ruthless shift isn't a character flaw or dangerous personality defect. It's sophisticated psychological protection that emerges when their natural empathy gets systematically exploited. This transformation represents the healthy integration of both compassionate understanding and strategic defense, creating individuals who can both heal and protect with equal effectiveness. This duality makes INFJs uniquely valuable in a world full of both genuine people who need support and toxic individuals who exploit kindness. Rather than fighting against your protective instincts or feeling guilty about your strategic capabilities, embrace them as essential tools for creating healthy relationships and environments where authentic connection can thrive. If you're an INFJ who's been told you're too sensitive or too intense, understand that these criticisms often come from people who benefit from your unprotected empathy. Your ability to shift from helper to protector isn't something to apologize for. It's something to master and deploy wisely. If you want to continue the journey to understanding yourself or an INFJ in your life, click either of the following videos, where we continue to unlock the secrets of the INFJ personality type.